Alrighty. Hey, everybody. Hope you are doing well. Welcome to a Tuesday afternoon Bible study. Hope you are great. Going to give it just a couple seconds for some people to jump online with us here. How you doing, Annie? Can you hear me okay? I hope this is working. I think it's supposed to be working. It is looking like it's live. I'm set up here in our Capitol View room. No, excuse me, our 205. Not overlooking the Capitol, but this is a room that we do a lot of lessons in, and you may be familiar with this place in this room. I got a whiteboard behind me. I'm going to use it just a little bit today and throughout this. And I'll get to that in a little bit. Hope everybody is doing well. Hope you're hanging in there. Man, this is weird, isn't it? It's a little bit strange to be connected this way, but I'm glad we can be connected this way. What have you been up to in your quarantine? Anybody up to anything good? I have definitely been taking advantage of the extra family time that we've been having during this season, and that is certainly been a blast. In my schedule, I'm kind of like doing half work at home and then half work in the office with some of the production stuff that we are doing, but the extra family time has been awesome. I'll tell you really quick before we jump in, one of the best things that happened the past couple of days is my wife came to me yesterday and she said, hey, because we're brainstorming what we want to do and how we're going to fill our time and things like that. We've been doing different things and it's been really fun. But she came to me yesterday and she said, hey, let's watch all of the James Bond movies from the first one all the way up till now. I know there's a new James Bond getting ready to be released. I don't know when it is. But we found a bunch of them, how you can stream them online. And we started yesterday with the very first James Bond movie, Dr. No, and we're going to attempt to get through as many of them as we possibly can. I don't know if any of you have ever done that. I've seen a bunch of them, but I don't think I've seen all of them, nor have I watched them in order. And so that's one thing that we're going to try to do over the next couple of months, but we'll see how that goes. Hey, listen, glad you have joined us. I want to give you a little bit of expectations of what this is going to look like each week. Each week over the spoiling your grandkids. That's a great hobby to do and thing to do during this time, Roxy. But each week on Tuesday at 4 o'clock, I'm just going to go live, and we are going to do a Bible study through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. It's going to be maybe a 30-minute-ish type of study. It'll vary a little bit from week to week, but just a way that we can connect, continue to interact with one another, and be with each other. You can be involved in this study in a couple of different ways. The first way that you can be involved is simply by commenting in the comment section, by asking questions. I may not get all to them live, but I'll definitely look at those after we're done, and we'll include them in the lesson for following weeks. And then, of course, one of the great things you can do is just over the next couple of weeks, as we walk through these incredible letters, you can just read them over and over again. 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. The great thing about 1st, 2nd, 3rd John is they are short letters. There's only 7 chapters total in all 3 books, and so if you want to feel accomplished, you can read all of them and be like, hey, listen, I read 3 entire books of the Bible today. That's how productive I was. And so I would encourage you to read over these letters. Just get it into your hearts, get it into your minds, and that will help as we walk verse by verse through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. So that is the plan. Hey, Adrian, good to see you. Glad you are here. Star Wars, yes, I have not done that either, and that's one of those things eventually maybe we'll do as well. We'll get through all of those Star Wars ones, but So anyway, so 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Here's what I want to do today. With the time that we have today, I just want to do some summary work on the 3 letters, just to kind of get our minds wrapped around the purpose of why these were written, and get some of the kind of the major themes. And then next week we will dive into 1 John chapter 1, verse 1, and we're going to walk verse by verse through these great letters. Okay? Hopefully that works for you. And again, like I said, if you have questions or things like that, post them in there. We'll take some time and we'll address those questions as we go along. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Now, obviously, just by the name, we would say, okay, John wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And pretty much that would be accurate. Now, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John are heavily connected to the Gospel of John, thematically and stylistically in a way. And so we have to think about the Gospel of John, why we think about 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. John's Gospel is most often attributed to who we call the disciple Jesus loved, or the beloved disciple. A couple of months ago, we went through a series where we just looked at different pictures from the Gospel of John as we went through our A Jesus for All series. The Gospel of John suggests that the disciple who Jesus loved, or the beloved disciple, knew Jesus very well, was an eyewitness even to his death and to his empty tomb. You can look at John chapter 13 and John chapter 19 and chapter 20 to read about John being present at those parts of Jesus' life. And a circle around this disciple would or could have then affirmed and circulated his account. So maybe there were some followers of John, the disciple, who circulated the account of John's eyewitness testimony. John chapter 21, verse 24 says, "This is the disciple who testifies to these things and who wrote them down." So here is John referring to himself in 3rd person. We know that his testimony is true. An ancient tradition suggested that the writer of the Gospel of John was John, who in the Bible is called John the son of Zebedee. John the son of Zebedee had a brother named James, and both of them were part of the original 12. Now, I love Mark chapter 3. It gives us a little insight into who John and his brother James were. When Jesus first called John and James to follow him, Jesus gave them this nickname, or they were given this nickname, and you can read about it in Mark 3:17, and their nicknames were the Sons of Thunder. The Sons of Thunder. I don't know about you, but that's one of the greatest nicknames you can receive. Now just imagine what they had to do, or the kind of the personality traits that they had to have in order to be called the Sons of Thunder, but that was their nickname. This disciple, the beloved disciple, or the disciple that Jesus loved, held a very high place of honor. There were certain parts of the Gospels that you read about that the disciple that Jesus loved was very close to Jesus. We know that Jesus, yes, he had his 12 disciples, but he had an inner 3 disciples that he was very close to, and John and James were 2 of those, and Peter was the 3rd. And so you look at the Gospel of John, and most often it is attributed to this disciple that Jesus loved, the son of Zebedee. And when you look at 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, most people would agree, and I believe that this was the same John that wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Stylistically, 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John are very similar to the Gospel of John. And I believe they all come from the same John, but when you look at the letters themselves, if you look at 1st John, you will not see an author listed. The letter is anonymous. 2nd and 3rd John, it just starts out with the elder. So there are a lot of people who believe that it was not John, son of Zebedee, but it was another John in the early church whose name was John the Elder. Either way, whether you believe it is John, son of Zebedee, or John the Elder, whoever it was, we know that this person who wrote John was definitely later on in age, in years, and he was overseeing a network of house churches that met throughout Asia Minor. it's very relevant to us today because basically that's the way that the church all over the world is meeting today, in homes. That's how the church began in the first century, but basically by meeting in different homes. And so this John was probably somebody who oversaw a network of these churches, and most people believe that it was around the city of Ephesus, which is in modern-day Turkey. And so these letters are very important. I think they were written by the disciple that Jesus loved, who also wrote the Gospel of John. But either way, they hold some incredible, incredible truths. Now, why was 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John even written? 1st, 2nd, 3rd John were written basically to avert a crisis, or a crisis was happening in the church that motivated the writings of these letters. And here was the crisis. There were a group of people in these days who had left the church and began to deny that Jesus was the Messiah, the Son of God. And as we read through these letters, those people will be made known. You can kind of see the language of the people who were bringing about this denial. They had great hostility. They generated a lot of hostility within the church during these days, and they were trying to motivate other believers to be unfaithful to Jesus. The book 2nd John is a specific warning to a specific house church. It was directly written to one specific house church. And it was about people who were denying, again, Jesus. And John, in his writings, calls these people deceivers. And he says, listen, hey, they're going to come to your house church and they're going to look for validation. They're going to look for support. But John is encouraging, hey, don't support these people who have walked away from the belief that Jesus is the Messiah and that he is the Son of God. We live in a current culture where there are people who have walked away from the church and who have preached and who have taught that Jesus is not who he actually said he was. And John calls those people deceivers. And we'll always have deceivers around us, but it's a great, great part of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John. It actually teaches us, how do we identify truth? How do we identify when somebody may be leading people astray from the truth of the gospel? And we'll get into that as we kind of move through this study together. So 2nd John was written primarily to a specific house church. 3rd John was even more specific. 3rd John is written to a very specific member of a house church, a guy whose name is Gaius. And John specifically writes to this guy saying, hey, I want you to welcome those who are faithful and those who are legitimate preachers and teachers of the gospel of Jesus. And John wrote to Gaius, and he had to talk to him specifically because the leader of that specific house church, his name was Diotrephes. He was just being a jerk. He was being this extremely rude. He was being very hostile toward John and toward anybody who was associated with John. And so John had to write specifically to this guy named Gaius to encourage him and to give him some instruction. And so that is basically a window into the conflict of what was happening in this kind of network of house churches during this time. And 1st John was basically addressing all of these issues. So 1st John was addressing all of these things. It's kind of almost like damage control, right? John is trying to hit all of these different crises that are happening during this time. And essentially, John is telling the believers in these communities that if you hold true to godly truth, then God is with you. And God will stay with you. John, throughout 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, speaks against false teachers who, again, question Jesus' divinity, question Jesus' human nature. And John's response is loud and clear. He says, listen, guys, Jesus is fully God and fully man. And that is not some obscure theological debate. I mean, that is something that upholds and supports all of what Christianity teaches. John knows that if his readers get this teaching wrong, everything else falls apart. Because Jesus became fully human, he could be the sacrifice for our sins. Because he is fully God, he has divine authority and divine power. And those two must be upheld and must be balanced, that Jesus is fully God and fully man. We'll get into that a little bit more as we walk through this as well. Now, I want to say another thing about the style of specifically 1 John. Because although 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, they are all considered to be epistles or letters stylistically, or their genre, 1 John is a little bit different. 1 John isn't so much a letter, but it reads more like a poetical teaching or a poetical sermon that John is giving to these house churches. And really, when you read the letter of 1 John, none of it is new information that isn't elsewhere in the New Testament. A couple of things. There is the typical identification of the sender and the receiver that are very typical in the letter genre is lacking in 1 John. It lacks the wish for health of the recipient. It lacks a conclusion that typical letters end with. And so 1 John, in its genre, is a little bit hard to understand and really hard to kind of allow the genre to influence our interpretation of it. But pretty much all of the ideas in 1 John and 2nd and 3rd John are ideas and truths that come from Jesus himself, that are recorded in the Gospel of John. So Jesus, in one of his final speeches in the Gospel of John, John 13 through 17, Jesus gave this great discourse, and basically all of the teachings of Jesus are repackaged and recommunicated here in 1 John. And so stylistically, 1 John is really, really interesting. Another thing stylistically about 1 John is that 1 John, it's not linear in thought. You know, in our Western mind, we like linear stories, right? This happened, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And that's very normal for our linear mindset in Western culture. But in first century Jewish culture, and even before that, a Jewish mindset or an Eastern mindset didn't work so much linearly as it did cyclically. And so in a Jewish mindset, they would tell stories and then repeat stories cyclically, and that's how they kind of understood it. If I could write this way, it's this kind of picture. In Western mindset, we like a story to start and go all the way to its ending in a straight line. But in Jewish thought and in a lot of Eastern literature, Eastern thought, a story starts, but then it kind of circles back and continues and circles back and circles back. This is a very cyclical way of telling a story or teaching a lesson. A big word for this is the word recapitulation. Okay, recapitulation. Drop that in a conversation this week with somebody, all right? But this is a very, very common way to communicate and to speak truths. For example, Genesis chapter 1 and 2 is recapitulation. Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 tell the exact same story. They tell the story of creation, but they tell it in just a little bit different way from chapter 1 to chapter 2 and for a little bit of a different purpose. And so you read Genesis chapter 1 and it's this creation story, and then Genesis chapter 2, it's the creation story again, but told from a different angle, and it has a different purpose. Very similar to the Gospels, right? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You have 4 accounts of the life of Jesus. They all tell the same story, but they tell it from a different angle and a different perspective. If you've ever read the book of Revelation, you may have read that book and been like, what in the world was that all about? One of the reasons, there's a bunch of reasons why Revelation is confusing, but one of the reasons is because it's not linear in thought. I also believe that John also wrote Revelation, so it's very consistent with all of his other writings. But in Revelation, it is, again, it's recapitulation. It's retelling a story over and over again. In fact, if you read Revelation from start to finish, you experience the end of the world 6 different times just by reading all the way through Revelation. And so this is the way that 1 John is written. It's written not in a linear way, but it's written in a cyclical way. And what John does as he writes 1 John is he he basically amplifies some major truths. And he amplifies these truths, and he goes back to them over and over again. And I'll tell you the three main truths, or the three main themes and ideas that John is trying to amplify and to bring about in the letter 1 John specifically. But he cycles around these themes. He comes back. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of hyperbole. There's a lot of contrast. I'll write these words up here for you, kind of in the what I would call the structure of John, but there's some major words that John goes back to over and over again. And the major themes are really this. Light. Light is a major theme in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Truth is a major theme in John's writings. And then finally, love. So if I were to put three key words around the letter specifically of 1 John, but also the whole, all three of these letters, it would be light, truth, and love. Light, truth, and love. And John comes back to those words over and over again. Light, truth, and love. God is light. And then he contrasts that in a stark way with darkness. So you'll read about light and darkness. You'll read about truth and evil. You'll read about love and hate. And John kind of contrasts these ideas in a very, very big way. And so here, John, it uses, again, it's not linear, but it's very cyclical in the way that it is written. One of my favorite things about these letters is that John really teaches us how to discern falsehood from truth. How do we know what is true and what is not true? And it's important for us to be able to understand that. There are a lot of things in the world that are not true. There are a lot of things that people will say, that people will communicate that are not true. There are even preachers and teachers and pastors who will say things that are not true. That's why you should not just take at face value what a preacher says or what a pastor says. I hope that every word that I say as I preach or I teach or any of our staff here, I hope that you're checking it. I hope that you are double checking it, because truth is so, so important. But John teaches us how we can discern falsehood from truth. And essentially what John says is people who claim to know God, yet who are not loving, they really don't understand truth. People who do not walk in the light, that will be a theme that John brings about, they are people who do not understand the truth. By their actions, they do not show and do not put forth that they understand what truth actually is. And as believers, we are called to flee from things that are not true. We are called to flee from the darkness, to resist evil, and to walk in the light of God. That is how we recognize that we are truly saved by Jesus, by loving everyone everywhere, by walking in the light and by holding fast to truth. And those are some major, major themes that are going to be brought about as we walk through 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Now, one of the things I want to do is I want to kind of lay out and speak right through what I call the structure, specifically of 1 John, because we're going to hit 1 John chapter 1, verse 1 next week. And what I want to do is kind of walk through the structure, and then we'll be done for today, and then we'll get ready to start 1 John chapter 1, verse 1 next week as we gather together back here on Tuesday. Now, the structure of 1 John, even though, yes, it is very cyclical in nature, we can kind of identify a couple of big sections to 1 John. And the first section is the introduction, which is the first 4 verses of 1 John 1. And I want to read the first 4 verses really quickly. If you have a Bible, look at 1 John chapter 1, the first 4 verses. It says, "That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we have looked at and our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. The life appeared. We have seen it, and we testify to it, and we proclaim to you the eternal life, which was with the Father, and with the Father and has appeared to us. We proclaim to you that we have seen and heard, so that you also may have fellowship with us. And our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. We write this to make our joy complete. Now, what I would ask you to do after we're done with this is I want you to go back and read those first 4 verses of 1 John and then read them alongside of the Gospel of John, chapter 1. The introductions are incredibly similar. He is talking about the Word of life, who is Jesus, the Word of life, who is God. For John, God is God the Father and God the Son. They are unified. They are together. And the themes between John chapter 1 and 1 John chapter 1 are incredible as they connect. Now, so that's the introduction. And then there are 2 major sections to John that we have some key ideas that we can build around. I'm going to give 3 main sections, even though I think in the book there are really 2 huge sections, but I'm going to add a 3rd. And those sections are this: chapter 1, verse 5 through chapter 2, verse 17. And that whole section is set up by a theme or a sentence that happens twice in the book of 1 John. If you look at verse 5 of chapter 1, it simply says, "This is the message we have heard." So, chapter 1, verse 5, this is the message we have heard. Now, if you flip over to chapter 3, verse 11, you see this phrase: "This is the message we have heard." So chapter 3, verse 11. So right there, we can kind of get an insight into the book of how the book is broken up. And chapter 1, verse 5, hey, this is the message we have heard. Then it goes into a few verses talking about how God is light. And if we go over here to chapter 3, verse 11, again, we get that phrase, "This is the message we have heard," and then it goes into talking all about how God is love. So you could break it down just in 2 sections, saying God is light, God is love. But there's this little section in between, 2:18 through 3:10, that talks about specifically the deceivers that are coming into the church, that are trying to bring people and draw people astray. But it speaks in that section a lot about truth. And so for me, when I read specifically the letter of 1 John, I am looking at the reality that God is light, God is truth, God is love. And those 3 things have something extremely, extremely important and relevant and practical for those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus. So that's how I would break down the letter or the writing of 1 John. That there's this introduction, then you have these 3 main sections: God is light, God is truth, God is love, and then there's a conclusion in chapter 5, verses 18 to 21. And what we're going to do over the next several weeks is we are going to walk verse by verse, and we are going to learn, what does it mean for you and for me today to walk in the light? What does it mean for you and me today to be able to discern truth from untruth? What does it mean for you and me today in our current cultural context, in our current culture, all the circumstances that are going on around us? What does it mean for us to walk in love the way that God is love? These themes are universal. These themes transcend time, transcend generation. These themes are themes that are so, so important for us to dive into, and I hope that we are encouraged as we walk through these incredible words from John over the next couple of weeks. So there's some thoughts for you, just on a summary of 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, why they were written, and a little bit of an outline that's going to guide us as we begin next week looking at 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. Thanks for being a part of this. I hope that you will join us next week as we look 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. We're going to walk verse by verse through. Hope you bring your Bible, bring a notepad to take some notes, and bring an open mind as we hopefully learn everything that we can as we continue to walk in the light, to walk in truth, and to walk in the love of God. Thank you for watching and listening. Share with your friends, and hopefully next week we can have a great time as we talk and as we study through 1 John chapter 1, verse 1. Love you all. Praying for everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll look forward to meet together this Sunday on our online campus. And then I hope you'll come back next week for part 2 as we dive in to 1 John chapter 1. Have a great, great night, everybody.